The Continental Divide of the Americas is the principal, and largely mountainous, hydrological divide of the Americas. The Continental Divide extends from the Bering Strait to the Strait of Magellan, and separates the watersheds that drain into the Pacific Ocean from those river systems that drain into the Atlantic Ocean, and along the northernmost reaches of the divide, those river systems that drain into the Arctic Ocean, though there are many other hydrological divides in the Americas. The Great Divide is by far the most prominent of these because it tends to follow a line of high peaks along the main ranges of the Rocky Mountains and Andes, at a generally much higher elevation than the other hydrological divisions. Geography. The Continental Divide of the Americas begins at Cape Prince of Wales, Alaska, the westernmost point on the mainland of the Americas. The divide crosses northern Alaska into the Yukon, then zigzags south into British Columbia via the Cassia Mountains and Omoneka Mountains and northern Nechako Plateau to Summit Lake, north of the city of Prince George and just south of the community of McCloud Lake. Further, the divide traverses the McGregor Plateau to the spine of the Rockies, following the crest of the Canadian Rockies southeast to the 120th meridian west, further forming the boundary between southern British Columbia and southern Alberta. The divide crosses into the United States in northwestern Montana at the boundary between Waterton Lakes National Park and Glacier National Park. In Canada, it forms the western boundary of Waterton Lakes National Park, and in the U.S. bisects Glacier National Park. Further south, the divide forms the backbone of the Rocky Mountain front in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, heads south towards Helena and Butte, then west past the namesake community of Divide, Montana through the Anaconda Peninsula Wilderness to the Bitterroot Range, where it forms the eastern third of the state boundary between Idaho and Montana. The divide crosses into Wyoming within Yellowstone National Park and continues southeast into Colorado, where it reaches its highest point in North America at the summit of Gray's Peak at 4,352 meters. It crosses US HWI 160 in southern Colorado at Wolf Creek Pass, where a line symbolizes the division. The divide then proceeds south into western New Mexico, passing along the western boundary of the endorheic plains of San Agustin. Although the divide represents the height of land between watersheds, it does not always follow the highest ranges, peaks within each state or province. In Mexico, it passes through Chihuahua, Durango, Zacatecas, Aguascalientes, Jalisco, Guanajuato, Querétaro, Mexico, the Federal District, Morelos, Puebla, Oaxaca, and Chiapas. In Central America, it continues through southern Guatemala, southwestern Honduras, western Nicaragua, southwestern Costa Rica, and southern Panama. The divide reaches its lowest point in Central America at the Isthmus of Rivas at 47 meters in Nicaragua. The divide continues into South America, where it follows the peaks of the Andes Mountains, traversing western Colombia, central Ecuador, western and southwestern Peru, and eastern Chile, southward to the southern end of Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. In North America, another, mainly non-mountainous divide, the Laurentian Divide, further separates the Hudson Bay Arctic Ocean drainage region from the Atlantic watershed region. Secondary divides separate the watersheds that flow into the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River from watersheds that flow to the Atlantic via the Missouri-Mississippi complex. Another secondary divide follows the Appalachian chain, which separates those streams and rivers that flow directly into the Atlantic Ocean from those that exit via the Mississippi River. Triple Points. Triple Divide Peak in Glacier National Park, Montana, is the point where two of the principal continental divides in North America converge, the Great Divide and the Northern Laurentian Divide. For this point, waters flow to the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean via the Gulf of Mexico, and the Arctic Ocean via Hudson Bay. Most geographers, geologists, meteorologists, and oceanographers consider this point the hydrological apex of North America. This is not the only place on Earth where two oceanic divides meet, i.e., where waters from a single point area feed into three different oceans. This status of triple divide peak is the main reason behind the designation of Waterton Glacier International Peace Park as the crown of the continent of North America. Sources differ, however, on whether Hudson Bay is part of the Atlantic or Arctic Ocean. Hudson Bay's waters flow predominantly to the Atlantic and do not directly contribute to the Arctic Ocean. Another triple divide, a triple point, occurs in Canada at an unimportant-looking hump on the border between Alberta and British Columbia, on the south slope of Snow Dome. At 2,940 meters, the point is higher than Triple Divide Peak. The exact location of the triple point is somewhat indeterminate because the Columbia ice field and the snow on top of it shift from year to year. The snow that falls on it per year doesn't really flow downhill as water. It creeps downhill in the form of glacial ice. Ice flowing away from that point down the Athabasca Glacier goes to the Arctic Ocean via the Athabasca and Mackenzie rivers. Ice flowing west goes to the Pacific Ocean via Bryce Creek and the Bush and Columbia rivers. Ice flowing down the Saskatchewan Glacier goes via the North Saskatchewan, and Nelson rivers into Hudson Bay. Some people believe the point on the south slope of Snow Dome to be the hydrological apex of North America because they consider Hudson Bay an extension of the Atlantic Ocean, despite the fact that many people think of it as being an Arctic water body. Hudson Bay lies entirely south of the Arctic Circle. The channels to the north of it are almost completely cut off by Baffin Island, so nearly all of the water that enters it flows out east via Hudson Strait into the North Atlantic Ocean rather than north into the Arctic Ocean. The result is that nearly all of the ice flowing down the Saskatchewan Glacier eventually ends up as water in the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, there are such triple divide points wherever any two continental divides meet. North America can be considered to have 5 major drainage systems, into the Pacific, Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, plus Hudson Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. Within this system there are 4 continental divides and 3 triple points, the 2 mentioned previously and a third near Hibbing, Minnesota, where the northern divide intersects the St. Lawrence Seaway Divide. Since there is no true consensus on what a continental divide is, there is no real agreement on where the triple points are. However, the main continental divide described in this article is a far more distinctive geological feature than the others, and its 2 main triple points are much more prominent. Hiking trail. The Continental Divide Trail follows the divide through the U.S. from the Mexico-U.S. border to the Canada-U.S. border. The trail itself is a corridor of pathways, i.e., dedicated footpaths or back roads, either on or near the Continental Divide. A less developed Canadian extension called the Great Divide Trail continues through 5 national parks and 6 provincial parks, ending at Kakwa Lake in east-central British Columbia. Exceptions. Many endorheic regions in North America complicate the simple view of east-to-west, ocean-bound water flow. Several endorheic basins appear to straddle the Continental Divide, including the Great Divide Basin in Wyoming, the plains of San Agustin in New Mexico, the Guzman Basin in New Mexico and Chihuahua, Mexico, and the Bolson de Mapimí in Mexico. However, such a basin can be conceptually assigned to one side of the divide or the other by its lowest perimeter pass. In other words, the proper assignment can be made by determining how the drainage would occur if the basin were to overflow. In line with this, USGS topographic maps show a unique path for the divide even when a basin is adjacent. Another kind of exception occurs when a stream falling onto the divide splits and flows in both directions, or a lake straddling the divide overflows in both directions. Examples of these are, respectively, North to Ocean Creek and Isil Lake, both located on the Continental Divide in Wyoming. The Panama Canal has this same feature, being man-made. Both the Chagres and Gaton rivers flow into Gaton Lake, which empties to both oceans. Numerous small lakes along the divide in the Rocky Mountains between Alberta and British Columbia flow into both provinces and thus into both Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. An example is the Committee Punch Bowl, a small lake named by Sir George Simpson, governor of the Hudson Bay Company, while touring his vast Canadian fur trading empire in 1825. According to historical sources, the small circular basin of water at the summit, 20 yards in diameter, is dignified with the name of the committee's punch bowl, in honor of which the governor treated them to a bottle of wine, as they had neither time nor convenience to make a bowl of punch, although a glass of it would have been acceptable. The reference is to the governing committee of the Hudson's Bay Company in London, England. The Alpine Club of Canada's Abbott Pass hut sits directly astride the divide in Abbott Pass on the boundary between Banff National Park and Yoho National Park, and thus rainwater falling on the eastern half of the roof flows via Lake Louise into Hudson Bay, while rain falling on the western half flows via Lake O'Hara into the Pacific Ocean. Ski resort Sunshine Village crosses the divide, causing confusion about which province skiers should pay taxes to: Alberta or British Columbia. British Columbia has a 7% provincial sales tax which Alberta does not have.